Hi, let's begin with a hypothetical. Let's say that you have a trans girl. Let's say that right now she's about the age of 10. Let's say that this trans girl is, or whatever the age is that's right before when she's going to start puberty. Let's say that this girl is not out to her family yet and lives in a relatively conservative part of the world. So she's scared, right? But let's say that eventually she decides to get the courage together and come out to her parents. And let's say that her parents are actually super supportive, right? Like best possible case scenario, like right off get-go, they're like, all right, what are your name and pronouns? Right? Like best case scenario response. In fact, why don't we say that her parents even suggest that they start looking for ways to get her on hormone replacement therapy? And let's say that she is thrilled about that because that's something that she wants and would like to pursue and, would help a lot to alleviate her dysphoria, especially concerning impending concerns with puberty. Let's say that they go to a Planned Parenthood because they heard that Planned Parenthood has informed consent, and so they figure that's the best place to start. Let's say that they go in and they ask to speak to a doctor. And let's say that we are also in a hypothetical situation where doctors at Planned Parenthoods have enough time to just come out and see people who are asking for requests. Let's say that a doctor comes out to see them. And let's say that the doctor doesn't have the greatest news for them. Let's say that this doctor tells them, the girl and her parents, that a law was just passed which makes it illegal for him as a doctor to prescribe her any medications. Let's say that her family isn't well off and isn't able to move or relocate to any sort of area where she would have any other means of getting hormone replacement therapy. Let's say that she isn't able to get any, by any means reasonably available to her. Let's say that she starts getting a little older, and puberty starts, and it has different effects on her, from deepening her voice to masculinizing her body, increased muscle growth, bone structure, jawline squares, develops facial hair, body hair, the works. Let's say that it gets to her and eventually she goes the way that a lot of trans girls do in that sort of situation where it might seem hopeless. And let's say that she takes her life. Let's shift the hypothetical. Let's say that we have a mother who's unrelated to the person we just talked about in her family, doesn't even know them of their family, or doesn't have anything to do with them or their daily lives. But let's say that she lives in the same city and state, right? Let's say that she was raised in a relatively conservative family, and she was raised to believe certain things about the world. She was raised to believe that the family and the structure of the family is paramount. That one of the main things that we as people have to do in society is to uphold the institution of marriage, and specifically the institution of marriage as it was taught to us. Let's say that she believes that, in some sort of Bible-related sentiment, that God created men and women, and that He created them as they are, and God can't make mistakes, and some sort of appeal to religious authority along those lines. And let's say that she believes that anything that contradicts those ideas is not only logically wrong, at least according to her logic, but is also morally wrong. And so she must protect herself and other people from those ideas. Again, all from this hypothetical mom's perspective. Now let's say that this mom is sitting down one day and watching the news. I'll let you make any sort of assumptions you want about what news network she's watching. And let's say that she sees a story on the news channel that goes something to the effect of states to allow parents to inject their kids with hormones. Let's say that she is very concerned, to put it lightly. Let's say that she goes to her computer and looks up the number of her state representative. Let's say that she calls up the representative's office and manages to speak with someone. Let's say that she voices her concern about how the liberals are letting parents force their kids to take hormones against their will, and that she wants to protect the children, and that she doesn't want anyone to harm these kids like this. And let's say that the representative from the office thanks her for her input and says that she will, and tells her that her voice has been heard, and then hangs up the phone. Now let's shift the hypothetical a little bit. Let's say that we have a congressman. Let's call him Mitch, for purely hypothetical purposes. Let's say that Mitch is a congressional representative of this fictional state we've been talking about. And let's say that, he doesn't really have any firm beliefs of his own, right? He is a, a career politician. And so what he does is he promotes the ideas that he thinks are popular to his constituents, because they are the ones who keep him in office and the ones who ultimately ensure his livelihood. Let's say that he sits down for his morning meeting with his secretary or his assistant or whoever it is, and he asks them, "Hey, so what is the agenda right now? What have people been talking about? What should I be focusing on?" And let's say that the representative tells him, "Well, we've been getting a lot of calls lately about how parents or how states are letting parents inject their kids with hormones, and a lot of people are concerned about that." And let's say that Mitch doesn't really know anything about what she's talking about, right? Let's say that Mitch kind of looks at his assistant and is just kind of like, "Well, now wait a second, is this something really to be, that sounds like kind of crazy. It's not, I'm sure it's a little more nuanced than that." And the assistant says, "Well, perhaps, but this is what people are calling and are concerned about." And so let's say that Mitch decides, all right, well, if this is what people are concerned about, and these are the people who vote for me, then that's what I'm going to push. And let's say that then Mitch presents a bill which would ban doctors from being able to provide gender-affirming care to people under the age of 16. That it is criminal to do so, and that they could face prosecution for it. Question: out of all of these hypotheticals, who among them are bad people? So, obviously, what I'm talking about, right? There's been a lot of talk recently about how a lot of states are pursuing bills, right? Pursuing bills that would criminalize doctors from being that make it illegal for doctors to uh, be able to give gender affirming care, specifically hormone replacement therapy, or to write prescriptions for hormone replacement therapy for people somewhere under the age of like 16 or 18, like somewhere in there, right? And this has been something that's been reported a lot lately. Here's one article. There are multiple, right? Republican state lawmakers push bills to restrict medical treatments for transgender youth. Right? Just to read a little blurb of it, Republican state lawmakers have filed a wave of bills that would ban medical professionals from treating transgender teens with hormones and sex reassignment surgery. I don't like this term, but anyway, we'll go on. Reigniting a polarizing national debate over the rights of transgender youths and the government's reach into doctors' offices. More than half a dozen state houses are considering bills that would penalize medical professionals and, in at least one case, parents who give young people access to puberty-blocking medications and other treatments. Conservative lawmakers argue that they are protecting vulnerable children who may be experimenting with their identity from making life-altering changes to their body. Characterization that advocates for transgender youths call misinformed and dangerous. So, really, I mean, like, as far as, my hot take on this, right? I mean, if you're watching this video, then there's a good chance that your politics are pretty left and that you already know a lot about trans stuff. And so, like, there really isn't too much to talk about the bill itself. They're terrible bills, right? They're very reminiscent of Roe v. Wade in the same way that Roe, or the law that was overturned in Roe, prevented doctors or criminalized doctors or made it criminal for doctors to give abortions to people who needed them, right? And so it's very reminiscent of that sort of law, right? Like, it doesn't actually penalize the youths or the parents, or I mean, in one state it does, but really this is focused on preventing doctors from providing necessary medical treatment, right? As the very first hypothetical shows, this is often life-saving medication and life-saving medical intervention, right? It's unfortunate that people have such misinformation and such misunderstanding about trans people that they can't recognize this, because everyone wants to talk about protecting the children and this, that, and the other. But the thing is, if that was really what people were talking about, like if that's what people were actually concerned about, then why didn't any of these people actually talk to these trans youths, right? Why aren't lawmakers actually talking to the people who this would most likely affect, right? Or would actually affect, right? Like, it seems odd, at least at first glance, that the consideration is on protecting these, this group of people who it seems like these laws would actually directly harm. And so I thought about this for a while, right? Excuse the sounds of the city if you can hear them. I can hear them. I don't know if you can. It's what it's like living in Baltimore. But I always find this sort of argument strange, right? Because the people who oppose these bills always approach them from the perspective of, oh, we're trying to protect these people, we're trying to help these people, right? In that sense, it also has some relationship to usually when people propose like anti-sex work bills, right? Oh, we're trying to protect these people, we're trying to make sure that they're safe and whatnot, even though that all those bills disproportionately end up harming those people much more than any protection they may have attempted to implement, right? It's a very weird coincidence. And so what I was trying to tease out with my hypotheticals isn't, it's not really to show, part of it is to show how bad it is, right? Like, it's terrible what happened to the girl in that hypothetical, right? And that is sort of the logical conclusion. Like, that is something I feel could realistically happen if these bills were to pass, if they haven't already. I haven't followed all of them individually. And that's really unfortunate. to say the least. But I think that there's a little more discussion that could be had on sort of how we got here, right? There's a little this is to some extent a little bit of meta commentary, because it's talking about the nature of why Republicans, particularly, because it's always Republicans. I'm sorry to say it, but like, Democrats are not doing this shit, and we're in a two-party system, so it's one or the other. Republicans are largely the ones doing these things, and it's interesting, I think, to explore sort of why, right? I come from a background where, I grew up with a lot of people who are Republican, and I've come to know a lot of them, and especially when I lived in the South, I got a very in-depth exposure to a lot of them and how they live and believe, and I said this in another video, I do believe that fundamentally, somewhere deep down, that these people are, and again, like, this is, some of you will definitely, if not a lot of you will definitely disagree with this, I believe that they at least hold themselves out to be good people, right? Actually, that is something a little more neutral. I was just going to say that at some extent they are good people, but the more neutral way of saying this is that, like, these people that we're talking about, the people like the mother and the politician, maybe not the politician, we'll talk about him in a second, the mother at least holds herself out as a good person. She believes herself to be a good person, right? There is sort of this question, though, right, about whether or not the fact that she came from a condition of, a set of conditions in life, which made her into a person which sees, especially people of LGBT and minority status, something to be opposed, right, or something she doesn't understand. There's this question of whether or not that makes her a quote-unquote bad person, right? And I'm not going to try and prescribe to you whether or not she is or is not. That's one of those questions where I'm still kind of, like, I think about that all the time, right? Mostly because there's a lot of people from my past. Like, actually, when I talked about this hypothetical, I actually had a very particular person in mind, because it's a person who I was actually very close to for a long time before I came out, and who I knew as one of the best people in my life for a good while. And it's only been since I've come out that has sort of changed, and I always like to explore with this person in my head why, she is such as she is, because otherwise it seems like, from what I know of her personal character, it seems like she would be a good person, and that everything should be just fine and dandy between the two of us, and yet they aren't. I asked the question I asked was who all of the bad people are from the hypotheticals. The easiest one, I think, to resolve is probably the politician. If you guessed that, congratulations. But yeah, like, a large part of this issue, especially with these bills, and especially with, like, these bills in particular, but also other ones related to trans people, is that, to be straight, most of these politicians really don't care about what they're talking about, right? Like, they do not care that trans kids are getting, the health care that they need, right? Or however they frame it in their minds, right? Like, they don't care, right? These are politicians who platform the ideas that their base expects them to, or that they believe their base expects them to, without really that much regard for the validity of those claims, right? As a baseline. That's, if you want to talk about contemporary examples in politics, that's why the impeachment trial went over the way it did, right? Every single senator except for one. Thank you, Mitch. I wonder why you did that. That might require some more discussion. I want to talk about Mitch in the future. But that's why just about every single Republican in the Senate voted to acquit Donald Trump, right? Because it's not like any of them actually believe he didn't do anything wrong, but they all know that their base expects them to vote to acquit, right? Like, these senators know that the people who keep them in office at least on the aggregate, believe that Donald Trump should still be president. And in that sense, it is a very political decision, right? And they really aren't making their decision on the merits of the trial, but rather based on what's going to keep them in business, what's going to keep them in office, right? It's a really unfortunate place to be in American politics. We actually talked about this the other day in con law, where, the validity of the Senate was always supposed to be that they are, supposed to be disconnected from majoritarian politics, that they're supposed to be the rational check on the House of Representatives. And unfortunately, if this isn't a signal that we have completely departed from that basic idea, I don't know what is. So the politician is almost certifiably probably a bad person, because he's of such an education and of such a background where he can probably recognize that what he would do would hurt other people disproportionately, but chooses to ignore that intuition because he knows that what he would do would, because he knows that talking about and platforming these ideas will keep him in office and keep him from avoiding criticism, from being soft on those issues by other by other politicians that would seek to challenge that seat and whatnot. The mom, I think, is a little more of a toss-up, right? Something that you may have caught, and something that was very intentional for me to put in there, was how the thing that really got the whole ball rolling with her calling up the what do you call it, the office of that senator, right? The office of that congressperson, whoever they are, that politician, is after she saw something on a news station, and in particular a conservative news station, right? I didn't expect this discussion to turn into a criticism of mass media, but hey, here we are. And I do think that ultimately at sort of the root of a lot of these issues is a central problem with the amount of influence certain news outlets, especially one certain news outlet in particular. Is there any reason I have to keep hiding the ball on this, like Fox, right? Like Fox News. There's a reason, why, like they're like a large issue, at least in my view, is that a lot of the views of the people who are voting for Republican politicians largely derive their views from the media that they consume, and most of them on the aggregate get the majority of their news from Fox News. And that's kind of terrible, because it means that you have a news station that sort of has like almost a monopoly on ideas for a substantial majority of Americans. And so let's say that we change up the hypothetical a little bit. Let's say that you have this mom, she was raised in the background she did, yada yada and all that. Let's say that she watches Fox News, or whatever news station she was watching, even though it's supposed to be Fox News, and she doesn't see the story we talked about. I mean, really, she could have seen any other story, but let's say that she sees something. Let's say that she sees a story about, did they make it Blair White? I don't know. Sure, let's make it Blair White. Let's say that for Fox News, for whatever reason, decides to have a change of heart about trans people and has Blair White on their show. And let's say that Fox News sees like all of, like they talk with Blair and they see that, trans people are fine and actually don't really conflict with Republican ideology all that much. And let's say that Blair has managed to convince them and the audience that actually trans people are fine. Now granted, she's going to say a lot of other very terrible things, but she at least accomplishes that much of convincing Republicans that, hey, trans people as a category of persons are fine. In that situation, this mom probably would not have gone and, she wouldn't have known about the bill in the first place, right? She wouldn't have known about these laws in the first place, but she might even actually be nicer to trans people. Granted, she may have adopted trans medicalist views from that little interaction on Fox, but the point is that really Fox kind of had the entire stranglehold. Like they're the ones, the one singular. Fox News is the one who set the ball rolling. From first reporting on this idea first reporting on the laws that the states are having, and then framing it in such a way where they know that it's going to incite a response from the people who watch, and then broadcasting that story to a wide enough audience where not only is that story going to reach the mom that we talked about, but all the other people who are very similar and come from the same sort of background, right? And that's unfortunate because that's going to have a massive ripple effect of eventually, in all likelihoods, reaching Congress, either state or national. And so I'm not sure if I would blame the mom entirely. Yes, she was ignorant, and yes, she could have gone online and educated herself a little bit more. But I don't think, and I'll definitely concede that she definitely has some blame with her. But I would not blame her as much as the politician, and definitely not as much as the news media, who are, in this case, both bad faith actors. That might be a good distinction because the mom at least sees herself as a good faith actress, right? Actress. I don't know. I'll just say good faith actor, but no, it's gender neutral as I use it. She sees herself as trying to do a good thing, right? Like she understands her actions as being morally just. Whereas the politician and the news media really at the end of the day only care about profits, right? And that is primarily what is going to incentivize their actions. For news outlets, it's going to be what can we push that's most inflammatory and going to get the most attention from our audience. For politicians, it's I'll do whatever my audience wants in order to keep my money, right? Bottom line. There's another party in this hypothetical that I want to talk about, just because I think that this is also worthy of consideration. Follow-up question. What about the doctor? Is the doctor a good person or a bad person for refusing to give this person, this trans girl, the medical treatment that she needed? Some people might make the argument that if you follow his some people might make the argument that but for his actions, she would not have died the way that she did, right? In the law, we call this but for causation, right? And there's a lot, honestly, actually, that would make a really cool criminal law hypothetical for an exam. If I ever become a law professor, I'm 100% using this. Remind me. Oh my God, if I'm ever a law professor someday, students, it'd be really cool if you watched this and remembered that. Anyway. But there is sort of this question about whether or not this guy is a good person, right? Because just like in Roe v. Wade, or, if we look at the facts of Roe v. Wade, what happened was you had doctors who were operating in a state, I believe, who were operating under such circumstances where it was then illegal for them to do what they did, but they were going to help this woman anyway, right? They saw it as they were doing their duty, and that their duty shouldn't have to depend on what the law says they can and can't do. This is another question where I'm not sure if there's a great answer, and I'm still figuring it out myself, right? So I'm not trying to presuppose the answer for you. If you are someone who believes that a doctor has an absolute duty to provide necessary medical treatment to the people who need it, then you might very well say that this doctor is a bad person. And I think that you are right or at least justified in saying that. Of course, I might also challenge that idea in saying that the doctor is, doing what the law says to do. Again, not all laws are just, so that excuse is not always going to get you very far if you want to talk about moral justification. But, this doctor, like, this might depend on his livelihood, right? Like, if he were to go against this law, then it might mean him losing all of his jobs, or all of his jobs. It might mean him losing his job and all of his income. It might mean that his family, which depends on him, isn't able to support themselves. I mean, there's a lot of considerations there. And so I don't think that situation is as black and white either. But I wanted to bring the question up because I don't think that the doctor is absolved of any moral duty or consideration in that situation either, right? It's not all about the mom and the news outlet and the lawmaker, right? When we talk about these laws, it's really easy as individuals to put all the blame on sort of the people at the top, right? To just be like, oh yeah, well, the person who made the law, like, they're terrible, and we can put all the blame on them, and if they were different, like, if they just were either punished or replaced by someone who would, do something different, then that would solve all the problems, right? And that might be true for a lot of circumstances, like this hypothetical Mitch character is probably a terrible person and deserves to be replaced as quickly as possible, and that would certainly solve a lot of issues. But at the end of the day, just remember that, laws, like, just because there's a law on something, and especially in this sort of a situation, just because there is a law does not mean that law is morally just. And sometimes there might be a reasonable expectation for someone to realize that if they follow the law strictly as they are told to do so, it might mean costing someone else their life. I'll let you do with that what you want. I'm not going to prescribe action specifically on the basis of it. But remember that laws are made by people. They're not perfect, and they have as much meaning and authority as we as society want to assign them. Obviously, go through the avenues that are available to you to challenge them, either through elections or the legislature or what have you. And honestly, if this isn't, an example of a law that would be wholly unjust in almost every regard, then I don't know what is. So yeah, that's my talk for the day. As a disclaimer, don't go out burning buildings. Or, this is not a call formally to be an anarchist or whatever. So if you get arrested and you for doing something and you tell the officer hey, I did this because Riley told me to. No, that's not true. I didn't tell you to do anything. Please don't get me arrested. I'm in law school and I am trying to learn how to do law. But I think it's good to have these conversations because I like being able to convey what I learn about the law to you all. So, yeah. All right. I am gonna get the rest of my Friday going. God, it's Friday. This week has been a long week of class. But hey, thanks for sticking with me, fam. I really appreciate the conversation. And yeah, I will talk to you later. Bye.